Hello and welcome back to the High Performance Nursing Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Today I've got a fellow Brit and Aussie citizen with us, Eva Storey. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you, Liam. I'm thrilled to be here.
So excited to chat to you. You have a wealth of knowledge to share with us, and everybody's in for a treat today. So let me tell you a little bit about Eva, and then she's going to tell us all the things. But Eva, born and bred in Manchester in the UK. We're kindred spirits from the UK. And Eva built an amazing 39-year international nursing experience where she built her career up to, from nurse up to nurse leader and manager, and now turned coach and founder of Eva Storey Coaching. I love how aligned we are, and we're going to dive deep into that. Eva is also the proud host of the podcast Real Nurse Stories, where she shares nursing career stories from across the board. And we'll dive into that as well. But thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Without further ado, let's dive in and tell us a little bit about your nursing career story. Give us a bit of a snapshot of where you started and how you got to where you are today.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks, Liam, for having me on the show. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to come and have a chat. So
Of
thank you.
course.
So, okay, my career, started my career in the UK. I did my nurse training at Jimmy's in Leeds, which some people may remember was famous for being on the TV back then. They did a whole TV show on Jimmy's, as it was known.
Was that the name of it, Jimmy's? Was
No,
that
it said James's University, but they
okay.
used to call it Jimmy's. So yeah, I started my training at 18, did 3 years of training, qualified, and then moved back to Manchester pretty much straight away. Did kind of staff nurses jobs, working night shift, worked at Christie's, kind of moved around a little bit. Had 2 children, so kind of worked fairly flexibly, did a lot of night shifts as you do when you have kids. And then kind of embarked on this journey of education. So my training was the traditional registered general nurse training. So at that point in time, which makes me sound very old, it was there wasn't kind of a degree entry or diploma entry training. So I did the traditional route and became very aware very quickly that if I wanted to progress in nursing, I would need to kind of up my game and really go and do some further education, because it was around the time that the universities were kind of shifting towards diploma degree level nurse training. So I started doing a diploma. I was working. I used to go and do a diploma after work, did that for 2 years. One thing led to another. And I ended up doing, got accepted to do a degree in community health, a specialist practitioner course, which nobody knew what that was back then. So we did this amazing course that was supposed to equip us. It's a bit like a nurse practitioner role, I think, but no one really understood it back then. So I came out with this qualification, got a job in the community, which I absolutely loved. But yeah, I wasn't necessarily using the skills that I'd trained for. And then kind of that's where my career started to take an interesting turn, if you like, because I was around working in community around about the time they were creating primary care trusts, which were new organizations in health, and there were lots of opportunities. And one of those was they were looking to put 2 nurses onto the executive committee. So the idea being that you would represent community nursing, but with that role came a specialist area. So I decided I was going to put my hat in the ring and apply for one of these jobs. So I did, and went through quite a tough interview process. To be honest, I didn't expect to get it, but I did. I then got through the first stage, and then it had to go to voting. So people had to vote. So there were 4 of us, 4 candidates. I was one of them. I think there was a nurse manager and a couple of other people. And to my absolute utter amazement, I was elected as this nurse representative. So I had never worked on a committee. I knew nothing about committees. I'd never had any involvement in anything, even outside of nursing. So landed this role and remember the first day going along to this committee meeting and sitting there and thinking, I have not a clue why I'm here. I do not know. I don't know the processes, the procedures. I just don't know. Got in my car and drove home thinking, I'm going to have to resign. I can't do this. Negative self talk,
Yeah.
going into
Yeah.
overdrive. Anyway, long story short, through kind of a series of conversations, I got introduced to somebody who was recommended as a mentor to me. And this person absolutely changed my whole take on
Mm,
what I was there to do and helped me to see that actually why I was there was to bring my practical nursing knowledge to an executive table to help them make decisions about patient care.
mm,
So, what started as a baptism of fire literally led me into this whole other world, if you like, of
mm.
executive boards that I just, yeah, I learnt an awful lot, an awful lot. And that was really the start of a journey into lots of different things in nursing. So from there, I kind of fast forward a few years, went into teaching. So I
Mm,
taught at uni, taught undergrad students and postgrad students all about lots of things to do with nursing. And then from there, had some experience with commissioning. So worked for the
mm,
Department of Health and the Strategic Health Authority, as it was then, in commissioning a GP-led health centre and new GP health centres in Manchester. So I learned a whole heap about commissioning and financing and all sorts of things that,
mm.
you just don't ever imagine as a nurse you're going to have that
Yeah.
experience. So had all these kind of, I want to say, weird collection of skills because they are weird if you look at my CV, and somebody once said that to me, oh, you've jumped around a lot, haven't you? And I went, well, I don't see it as jumping around. I see
Yeah.
it as I've got all this, different
Amazing.
experience. Um, so all of my career up until me being in my late 40s was in the UK doing all
Mm,
these different things. And then um, I had the opportunity to go and work in Qatar, in Doha, where the
mm.
World Cup's playing at the moment. I was successfully recruited as a director of nursing for the home healthcare service, which
Wow.
again was another leap of faith and another kind of, oh my God moment. What have I done? Because, you like, I like to think that I knew quite a lot culturally about
Mm,
different things. And I realized I actually didn't know very much at all until I went
mm.
to work there. So I had 3 years of fabulous experience, quite challenging, as you would imagine, as a
Yeah.
woman working in a Middle Eastern country, and challenging in the sense that there were two sets of HR rules. So you'd have a set of HR rules for expats and a set of HR
Mm,
rules for nationals. So I had to navigate all the time this, being careful because you have to be careful. And I think what I learned most from that role was how to have a difficult conversation in a
mm,
respectful way that you could
mm.
make a point without upsetting somebody.
Yeah.
Um, and it was great experience, which stood me in good stead when I then came to Australia and was recruited for the role of a nurse director in the statewide rehabilitation service at Fiona Stanley Hospital here in Perth,
Mm,
which in a lot of ways was all of that accumulated experience and knowledge kind of, I think I realized in that role how much that helped me to shape not just me, but the team that I managed, because a lot of the work that I did there was coaching them, really
mm,
helping them to do some of the things that maybe they hadn't had exposure to or hadn't had somebody to teach them how to do it. So it's a bit like at times people used to laugh and say, oh, it's like a doctor's surgery, people sitting outside waiting to come. And it wasn't that they were in trouble. It was just generally, there was something I was helping them with or something they'd want to ask me.
mm,
Um, and I really love that role actually,
mm,
because I think it's a real privilege to be a nurse leader. And I look very much on that role as a kind of a change agent. You're there to
Mm,
help other people grow and develop their skills. I never saw it as a long-term feet under the table job. I've never seen any job as a feet
mm,
under the table job, but it was my opportunity to share a little bit of what I learned and help other people develop with the knowledge that, that would finish. I would go do something else, and someone else would come along and impart their knowledge with a different take to me, was how
mm,
I looked at that. Um, and then kind of a series of events around, there was some financial restructure went on in Perth, and I went through a not so nice time in that my position was abolished. And then I went
mm.
through this process of being a redeployee, which I'd never heard of till I came to Australia. It was like, what's this about? Um, but I think the biggest shock for me, Liam, was I'd never been in a position where I'd applied for jobs and not either been shortlisted or got the job. And suddenly
Mm,
here I was applying for jobs everywhere and not getting beyond literally the selection, not, getting to the first post even.
yeah, wow.
And it really psychologically messed with my head. And I thought,
Mm,
I can't keep doing this. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I've never had this problem before. And it was at that point that I really sat down and thought, right, okay, I want to think about how I can use the skills that I've got in a different way. And that's kind of really what drew me into coaching, because
mm.
I realized that I'd coached a lot of people informally as part of the roles I'd had, but I hadn't had any formal coach training. So I went off and did professional life coach training with the Life Coaching Academy here in Australia, and then set off on a mission to set up my own business.
Mm,
And predominantly, my passion was to work with nurses, so to offer coaching to nurses, because I know and knew what difference it could make and
mm,
what difference it had made to me. As part of learning to coach, you obviously coached yourself. And I saw that there was a massive gap in how do we support nurses before they get to that point of stress, overwhelm, and burnout. That's too late.
mm,
What is it that we can do back nearer the point where stress starts to affect people that helps them to understand mindset, what tools can they have in their toolbox, makes such a big difference to people. And that's really, what drove me to focus my business around supporting nurses. And
mm.
that is my mission, to make coaching accessible to nurses.
I love that so much. Oh my goodness, there's so much I want to ask you that I didn't know before you came on. And this is why it's great when people come on and they tell their story. Oh my goodness. So much experience. One thing I want to jump onto is the ability for you to allow yourself to just go and do something without knowing the how. I think this
Yes.
comes
Yeah.
up a lot, right, in coaching. And specifically in the work that we do here is like people say to us, well, I can't do that because I don't know how.
Yeah.
And I just
Yeah.
love that you just constantly continued to push yourself and that you gave yourself permission
Yeah.
without knowing the how.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was, quote unquote, I say easy? Obviously, in the moment, it's not easy, but why do you think you were so attuned to doing that?
I think when I look back, it wasn't that I actively sought that. It was more that opportunities came along. So it was often at points in my career where I wasn't sure what was coming next. And somebody would say to me, oh, there's a role coming up. So the commissioning role, somebody actually
Mm,
said to me, oh, if you're interested, there's this role coming up in commissioning. And I didn't know the first thing about commissioning, Liam. I honestly didn't. But I was thinking, well, that's not a bad thing to learn more about, because I knew at the time that there were lots of changes. This was in the UK in health, and
mm,
that actually those were probably good skills to have.
yeah,
So it was kind of a, well, why not approach,
yeah, yeah.
because you can always learn something. And I think that's probably been my biggest takeaway from all my experience, as scary as it was at times, and it was scary, I'll be
Mm,
perfectly honest. there was always something that I learnt that helped me when I moved on again. So nothing was ever wasted. Nothing was ever, and I can never kind of never thought about a job with regret. So, for example,
Mm.
I worked in operating theatres for a while and I didn't like that because people were asleep. I was like, I like talking to people, but I learned a lot, and I've
Yeah.
always taken that approach. Really, there's something you can learn here,
Yeah.
and I think
It's
sometimes our own beliefs hold us back. To believe that you can't do something because you've never done it before or you've no experience. Part of what I would say is, well, how do you know that? How do you
mm,
know that this could not, might not be a fabulous opportunity that could lead to something that you never expected and can change your
totally.
life?
Yeah. It's about us just allowing ourselves to explore what could be possible, right?
Yeah,
And I think
yeah,
we spend so much time looking at what like we've done in the past and that kind of we use that to create our future
yeah,
instead of being like, oh my God, curious about it. And it sounds
yeah.
like you saw an opportunity and you were super opportunistic, which I love. And you were just like, well, what have I got to lose?
Yes,
What's the worst
exactly.
case scenario here? I stay where
Yeah,
I am or I get a new job. It's
yes,
amazing.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I love that message. So thank you for sharing it. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was around the power of the mentor. You mentioned that there was a mentor
Mhm.
that really changed the trajectory. Um, why do you think it's important for nurses to have mentors?
I think having the mentor that I had at that point in my career and in my life, I'd never had a mentor up until that point, and I didn't really understand how mentorship could help. I just remember turning up at this person's office. I was like, I can remember saying, I've got all these things I need to read and I don't know where to start and blah, 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 just like, and she looked at me and she said, right, where are all these things you've got to read? So I brought out this great big pile, I kid you not, put it on her desk and she picked it up and she put them in the bin. And I was like, no, 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 don't do that. I've got to read them all. She said, no, you haven't. She said, they're staying in that bin. She said, tell me why you have got this job, this role, this executive role. And I said, well, I've no idea. That's why I've come to see you because I'm struggling. And she said, no, you do know. And I'm looking at her thinking, I don't know what she's trying to get at here. And she said, what do you do every day? I said, well, I work as a community nurse. And she said, and what do you do as a community nurse? I said, well, I care for people in the community. So she said, exactly. She said,
Mhm.
that's what you bring to the table. She said, all of that stuff, yes, you can read it if you want to read it. She said, but the reason you're there is because you bring that knowledge, skill, patient insight to that discussion at exec level. That's why you've been
Mm.
put there.
Yeah.
And I can remember the penny dropping, thinking, I had not thought of it that way.
Mm.
And it made me, working with her really made me see things from a different perspective. She was a fabulous clinician. She had a lot of experience. She was, we got on really well. We stayed in touch long after our mentorship finished. And I honestly think, Liam, if I hadn't had mentorship at that point, I probably wouldn't have stuck with that role because it
Mm.
was so scary.
Mm.
And, mentorship is just such a powerful tool to have in your toolbox that helps to keep a perspective on
Mm.
what's going on and challenges you thinking a bit. And, I like to say it's holding the mirror up. So, sometimes we get in our own heads too much, and it's challenging that to help you to see where you need to grow. And
Mm.
it's something that I do. I mentor students from the Australian College of Nursing, so I
Mm.
give back some of my time for free to them for that
Mm.
reason, because mentorship in nursing is really important. It's not something you hear a lot about, something I always encourage nurses to do. Coaching is a bit different. The two
Mm.
things get mixed up.
Mm.
So Coaching is kind of more, as you will know, Liam, it's forward facing. It's helping someone to set goals and then holding them accountable. Whereas mentorship is more about imparting some of your knowledge, if you like, experience and wisdom, and helping someone to develop and grow their skills.
Mm,
So there are
mm,
slight differences. But I would say to anybody who's, it doesn't matter where you are in your career, whether you're a grad, whether you're someone who's many years experience in nursing, a mentor can really help you, especially if you're new to a role,
mm.
you know.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think that a lot of us do try something new, and then because of that lack of support, we don't continue with it, like you
Yes.
said.
Yeah.
And it kind of breaks my soul a little bit when I think about that, right? That people don't
Yeah.
get the support that they need moving forward.
No.
Is that something that you've noticed is more prominent here versus the UK, or is it pretty kind of global in your experience?
I think I have noticed it here. So certainly I did some work during COVID in a vaccination service here, and a lot of the grads really struggled with the transition from that service to a role on a ward.
Mhm.
And I talk to people all the time, Liam, and I generally say, how are you going? And what I was hearing was lack of support, thrown in the deep end, not prepared for how hard or how challenging it would be. And yeah, sadly, I'd hear stories like somebody said to me I was one of the most senior nurses on the floor, and this was a grad who was not even a year out of grad.
Yeah, wow.
And you think we've taken out, so I speak mainly because I'm obviously in Perth. So there was this kind of cost saving exercise to take out some of the senior levels of nursing. And I think we didn't really consider how you grow the next generation of leaders.
Mm,
So, how do
mm,
you impart some of that skills, knowledge, and experience to the up and coming leaders? So, and I know that that's happened in the UK, same thing, they've taken out whole layers of experienced staff. So the NHS is running on very junior
mm. Yeah.
staff, and that must be incredibly difficult because
Mm,
if I look back, there was always somebody senior that you could go to for advice or support or just to check out, is this okay? Am I doing this right? If you don't have that and you don't have the breadth and depths of knowledge and experience, that must be
mm.
terrifying.
Yeah.
And, and I think what that does is push up stress and burnout, you know?
Mm, yeah. And I mean, I think this is where we both focus, right? In delivering coaching to nurses and midwives is helping them navigate the non-clinical side. Because as clinicians, we're set up, right? We
Yeah.
have all the things. It's so easy to go out and get the clinical things.
Yeah.
If you're short on cannulation skills, you can book a course and you get it
Yeah.
done in a day.
Yeah.
If you need to do your ALS, there's plenty of providers. But when it comes to being a human that nurses, it's a totally different ball game,
Yeah.
and that is the missing piece, in my
Yeah.
opinion, and that's
Yeah.
what I'm hearing from you with all your amazing experiences, that we just don't focus enough on how can you fully embrace the human aspect of you as an individual
Yeah.
and bring that into your nursing and
Yeah.
manage it, because stress, overwhelm, and all of those things, they're not necessarily clinical issues. Yeah, for sure, there's clinical pressures, but
Yeah.
it's about how we cognitively manage all of those
Yeah.
pressures, right,
Yeah.
in our day to day life. It's so funny the story that you just talked through, like your experience and getting to that place where you were being rejected, like from applications. I literally just recorded a podcast about that and about my experience. And it's so interesting that I think, especially as high performers, you're driven individuals that are
Mm.
trying to build their career, when we get that first no or that first rejection or it can seem like the end of the world, right, cognitively. And we
Yeah.
go to this place, and I'm wondering if that's what a lot of our nurses and grads are experiencing, because we're taught from day one that you can't stuff up, you can't fail, you
No,
can't mess
that's
up.
right.
Our patients need to be safe. And we're basically saying that and neglecting our own
Yeah.
safety
Yeah.
in the process, because it's impossible, right, for us
Yeah.
to deliver 100% A plus care all of the time,
Yeah.
especially without senior nursing leaders. It's incredible. It's crazy. So talk to us about your director of nursing experience. I know there's lots of very high performing driven individuals that listen to this podcast and they've got big plans and big dreams. I was one of them until I got to nurse unit manager and went, oh no. But you really put it in a positive light. So talk to us about director of nursing roles and what that looks like. Like tell us a bit more about what you would do day to day in those kind of roles.
I think there's a difference between director of nursing in the Middle East and nurse director here. So the two are probably similar. They just call them different things.
Mm,
So if I refer probably to nurse director roles as opposed to director of
yeah.
nursing, um, I think the biggest difference for a nurse director role is that you are engaged at an executive level. So you are working with obviously the exec team, the board, the finance team, and it's high pressure, high power. There's a lot of responsibility, but there's also opportunities, and I think that's where a lot of people are put off by going higher up into nursing, and I don't think that should be the case. I think if you set yourself up for success, and part of that is mentorship, coaching,
Mm,
knowing and understanding yourself, knowing your skills, knowing where your development lies. And if you're clear about that and you almost have a plan as to, okay, what are the things that I need to learn that will enable me to do this role well? As well as shadowing. So getting a
mm,
feel for what the different roles in exec are, how they function, and talking to people about expectations. What are the expectations of you in that role?
mm.
Because that often we don't go there. We take the role, we're not really sure, a bit like my baptism of fire. You know, my learning with hindsight was, okay, we can talk to people, we can go and ask the chief exec, you know, what are your expectations of me? And I have actually asked that question at
Mm.
interview, and it you get interesting responses to
Yeah, I
that
can
question
imagine.
because most people, there's a bit of paper shuffling and a bit of squirming on chairs because that, you know, they're not used to people being that direct. But if you're going for a senior role, I want to know
Mm,
part of my, you know, this is not about all about me being assessed. It's also about me assessing, do I really want this
totally.
job and do
Yeah.
I want to work here? So I want to know, what are your expectations of me in the first 12 months? Because
Mm,
that tells me a lot about you.
yeah.
So I think never be afraid to ask questions. That's something again that I've learnt in lots of roles. And I've had people say to me, you know, finance team, I used to always go saying, I don't understand this. Can you please explain it to me?
Mm,
And they'd laugh and they'd say, well, you're the only person that ever comes and asks all these questions. But that's how you
interesting.
learn. That's
Yeah,
how you learn.
yeah. And it's how
So
it should be.
yeah, there's no shame in not knowing, and
No.
we need to lose that. You know, there's a lot of, I think in nursing, in senior roles, there's a lot of imposter syndrome because
Yeah.
you go from a clinician where you're confident, you know, we've touched
Mm,
on that, you know where you can go for training, your clinical skills are excellent. The higher up you go, the more removed you are from that, and it's a whole different skill set then that kicks in.
yeah, yeah.
And you know, that I think is what a lot of nurses who are new to very senior roles struggle with. And there's not a lot of openness about that, Liam, in terms of,
Mm,
I feel like an imposter. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm, you know, free falling here, flying by the seat of my pants.
mm,
And that causes a lot of stress and
yeah,
anxiety.
yeah.
So to come back to the mentorship and the coaching, these are tools that can help you navigate that because everybody feels like that.
Mm,
You know, people,
mm,
some people don't admit it. Some people have a very tough exterior and that's how they manage it. So they're
mm,
not particularly approachable. Some people are approachable and honest. My experience is not often do people say, you know,
mm,
honestly.
mm,
Um, but I think it's an opportunity to influence. And that's the other thing I would say, you know, the roles I've had, I have always advocated for nursing and for patient care. And sometimes that's got me in hot water because
Mm,
I've had to learn how to do that in a way that makes the point without kind of people thinking, "Oh, here we go again," always back to patients. I
mm,
exaggerate that, but
mm,
you get
mm,
the idea. You can have a conversation in a respectful way. Part of that is doing your homework, so having your facts, having the data to support whatever it is you want to ask for or say, so that you present as professional and informed and you can hold your own. You can
mm,
present, you can question, you can argue. And, to question, I think, again, somebody once said to me, there's no such thing as a daft question. And I have
mm,
really used that all the time.
mm.
If I don't know, I'll ask. I'm
Yeah,
not ashamed to ask. That's
yeah,
how I learn.
yeah, totally.
And we hold ourselves back by thinking, oh, we can't ask that because people will think, that we're not knowing what we should know, or it's
Mm.
about how we appear to people. But truth be known, probably everyone else sitting around the table is asking the same thing, but no one's asking the
Yeah,
question.
yeah. That's so interesting that you say that because isn't it interesting that if we had staff on the floor that were not being vulnerable and asking questions and being open and were making mistakes and maybe, doing things that weren't right, we
Yeah,
would so quickly pick them up. And
yeah,
we would be like, hey, let's have a chat. And we'd have a whole cycle and a process for them. What I've seen to be true at the higher levels, as I built my own career, is that people really do struggle with that transition because you're an amazing clinician, like you said.
yeah.
You move into this role and everything is exposed. You don't want to be vulnerable. There's no openness.
No,
You've got your guard up. Brene Brown talks about that. Like,
yeah,
you put on your bodysuit and you're
yeah,
not open to anything because you've got the resistance.
yeah,
And then from there, it's just a spiral, right?
yeah,
And we have burnt out leaders that are buffering, that are
yeah,
not enjoying their work, that are creating toxic cultures.
yeah,
If that's how you show up, how did the staff show up?
yeah,
How do they deliver the care? I
yeah,
truly think that the work that you do in this space is integral for us to be able to build positive cultures.
yeah.
I was thinking about this recently. I'd love to know what you think about this, but in your experience, that the thoughts that the leader have and that they hold and the beliefs that they have about what's possible in their teams directly impacts the results that their teams end up
Absolutely.
creating. And it's so it came to me. I was sitting here the other day and I'm thinking about it and I'm like, holy crap. If you believe as a nurse unit manager that your team cannot get to zero falls, which I did whilst I worked in geriatric rehab because it seemed so
Mm,
unachievable, of course my team are not going to go out and create
yeah,
that result
yeah,
because they're not going from an empowered thought and
yeah,
empowered
yeah,
feeling. Instead, they're like, well, Liam thinks that it's not achievable, so I'm just going to run with
yeah,
that. Oh my goodness, think of all of the things. Oh, we're one short today. The language that we use as
yeah,
leaders
yeah,
and the lack of insight and acceptance and awareness that we have around how that impacts
yeah.
people. What do you think it would look like if we really truly embodied coaching in healthcare at a leadership level?
You see, that's just such a great question, Liam, because, as you were talking then, let me give you an example which perhaps puts it into context, because I think we tend to think about coaching at a senior level. Okay. I tend to see coaching as something that should be accessible no matter where you are. So from a
Totally.
grad
Yeah.
all the way up to, director of nursing.
Mm,
I When I worked in the nurse director role here in Perth, the team of senior nurses that I managed had never been involved in overseeing quality projects. Okay.
yeah.
So, of course, we have the national standards,
Mm,
and, we ward staff were involved in doing lots of audits. And it was a bit of a chore for them. They were like, roll of eyes, here we go again, another audit kind of thing. And it became clear that it was just going through the process. It wasn't really, so my head, why are we doing an audit? We should only be doing an audit if we're learning from it and going back into practice and implementing whatever we found through the audit and made some changes. So it became very clear very quickly that a lot of the senior nurses I was managing hadn't had exposure to quality projects. So on a ward level, so take falls, for example,
Mm,
you know, with filling in the Datix forms, why do we fill the Datix forms in? Well, we fill them in because we look for trends. Who's looking at the trends? Well, the safety quality team are looking
mm,
at the trends. So question then becomes, so why are the ward staff not getting that information and looking at the trends? Because surely that would make more sense if you're looking at who's falling, what time of day, where are they falling?
mm,
Then those questions start to generate. So what can we do about this? How can we set some targets around
mm.
reducing the number of falls in a day? So essentially, what we did was set up all these different quality groups that were aligned to the national standards. And I said to the nuns, I said, okay, I'm going to share the data with you. So, pick the things that come up most frequently on your wards. So things like falls, pressure injuries, medication errors, I think were the top three.
Yeah.
So they get that data. And then I asked them to assign one of the floor nurses, so almost create the small standards team to look at
Mm,
that. So what I want you to do is give them the data, and you're going to have to oversee it and to ask them to unpick it, so to look at it, understand it, and then come up with some suggestions about how can we try and make an impact on this. And I simplify it because there was a lot of work went into
yeah.
that. But the end result of that, Liam, was it was probably one of the most rewarding things to see, because suddenly the staff are coming to me with projects and ideas, and can we try this, and
Mm,
we've unpicked this, and we think this might be happening, we really want to try this. So to be able to enable that as a leader and give them permission, say, okay, yes, you can go and try it. There has to be some safety things in place,
mm,
but you need to come back and update me regularly and tell me if there's any problems.
mm,
And that took probably a good 2 years to get that up and running, but it changed the landscape from,
mm,
why are we doing this? Don't want to do it, roll of the eyes, to suddenly being engaged in that. It was meaningful for them because they were starting to understand it wasn't just about ticking the Datix box. It was, how do we make a difference? And that's the bit that's so often missed. Why do we do it?
mm, mm.
As leaders, we have a responsibility. You take your team with you, you show
Yeah.
them there's the direction, that's why we're going there, that's why we're
Mm,
doing this. Because ultimately, we want it to be a positive patient experience. We don't want someone to fall out of bed and break their hip. Yes, it's going
mm,
to happen sometimes, and we need to learn from that.
mm.
And so much sometimes in healthcare is removed from the floor, as I call it, and it shouldn't be. We should be active partners in understanding these things at a floor level. And to me, that's part of coaching. That's not
Mm,
kind of, as a leader, you're coaching, you're growing those skills, and that comes with the role, I guess, is what
yeah,
long-winded answer, but
yeah.
it's so important. And the other thing that did was foster this sense of almost like inquiry. It was a bit
Mm.
competitive as well. It was, it kind of got competitive between the other wards about,
Yeah,
who was doing better, but that didn't really matter. It was healthy competition.
yeah, yeah. I love that. So just simple things like asking why, and really
Yeah.
helping realign the team. So integral. And why is such a powerful question.
Mm.
People underestimate the power of why.
Yeah.
So I love that you mentioned that. And then curiosity. Just
Yes.
allowing people to get creative. I think that's one of the things that for me was stripped from being a nurse unit manager. I wasn't
Yeah.
up at the Don level or the nursing director level, but creativity was like removed from the role, right? And I had to find opportunities to be creative because it's one of my
Yeah.
highest values. And I saw that across my colleagues at the same level. And we're
Yeah.
all like deep in the data, deep in the roster with all these inefficient processes that don't speak to each other. And I'm like, how can I get creative? So I got creative with our quality improvement board and, made it all jazzy and because we spent every day there,
Yeah,
right? We stood there every
yeah,
day. It's where we started our shift. We
yeah,
looked and reflected on our numbers and we, took a moment to be proud of what we'd achieved. And I think that at the nurse unit manager level and maybe above, there's a lack of just strategic direction
mm,
overall. I think
mm,
in my experience here, having worked across a couple of different states and territories, we outsource the direction externally, which maybe is a great way to do it, but it's so simple really when you look at it on
yeah,
paper. Let's have
yeah,
some goals, let's align it, let's
yeah,
delegate them,
yeah,
and let's set up some data to measure
yeah,
and then take it from there.
yeah.
But it seems to be super difficult.
Well, and I think it is, again, it's a leap of faith. It's trusting people. It's saying, okay, have a go at this,
Mm,
but you
mm,
have the boundaries there, because obviously healthcare, you have to be
yeah,
careful,
yeah,
but it's trusting your team. And I think as a nurse leader, you touched on it before, what I see a lot of people doing is holding the power within.
yeah.
So, it's seen as, well, I'm holding on to this knowledge and power because I'm a leader and it gives that
Mm,
sense of importance. Well, I totally disagree with that,
mm,
because being a leader is about doing the opposite. It's about empowering your team,
yeah,
empowering your staff, allowing them to be involved, let them be creative to a point, let them come
mm,
up with solutions, because our teams have good solutions, and that should be the avenue that it comes up through the senior levels. And we shouldn't be trying to squash that, because
yeah,
all you're doing when you squash it is demotivating a team. You're
mm.
not allowing them to be creative. You're not tapping into that collective knowledge. You're stifling their growth, really.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You
And
know?
I think it's about looking and seeing who you have in your team, right? And looking at their zones of genius and
Yes.
tapping into
Yeah.
that. And I think recognizing at a manager level, leader level, even though you might be specialized in something, you kind of become a generalist. You've got to do lots of different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even if you're an ICU specialist or community nurse specialist, you've got to kind of remove that hat and then put on the NUM or the leader or the whatever hat and look at it through a different lens.
Yeah.
And that's where coaching and mentorship
Yeah.
is super
Yeah.
phenomenal at helping you look at it through a different lens. So I love that. Or we could talk about leadership forever, but I want to I want to dive into your coaching and the
Yeah.
coaching, Eva Storey Coaching and what you do in this space. So tell us about coaching and how coaching changed your life, because I know there was a
Mm.
pivotal moment where you got coaching, and what you do and what you offer to nurses.
Mm. I think that's really when I started to do my coach training, part of that training was having access to coaching. And I had got very stuck in my head, if you like, around what I was going to do. I'd started my training, I'd left a role, as I described earlier, and I kind of fell into this bit of a hole, for want of a
Mm,
better word. And I really was stuck. And I had a coaching session with this person who was my mentor, became my mentor. And she really challenged my thinking and made me see that actually what was holding me back was my own thought processes, and that the feeling of being stuck was created in my head, and it
mm,
didn't necessarily have to be that way. And I think the biggest, what I call aha moment, was when she helped me to see that I had all this skill and experience and knowledge, and that that could be put to use in a different way. It didn't necessarily have to be imparted in the way that it had been.
mm,
And I can remember sitting there and thinking, I had never even thought about that.
mm, mm.
So it set me off on this almost energized, oh my God, how come I didn't think about this until now? But actually, it wasn't that she told me what to do, it was that she helped me to see
Yeah.
where I was stuck and a way out of that.
Mm,
And it was such a powerful experience, and I really reflected on that whole time. It wasn't a positive time leading up to the coaching, but beyond coaching, I really kind of made me think about how many nurses must be in the same position that I was in? And I thought of myself as somebody who was quite resilient. And it kind of, was a difficult time for me. And the reflection was, if somebody wasn't as resilient or didn't have the tools in the toolbox that I'd had and the
Mm,
access to coaching that I'd had, how would they cope with that?
mm,
And that the difference that having a coach to do exactly what had happened for me could make to that person. And if we could stop one person ending up in that horrible place of being burnt out, absent from the profession because they have to take time out to recover, don't always come back, that has to be something that is of benefit to the nursing profession.
mm,
What's been interesting has been the lack of understanding, not so much from nurses, but from senior people in health who equate or seem to equate coaching with poor performance.
mm. How
So there's
interesting. Yeah.
there's been a fair bit of education, on my part about how coaching can help. I write about coaching a lot.
Mm,
But it's interesting that there is this perception that people do think coaching is around performance. And I guess in a roundabout way, it kind of is, but in a positive way. It's
mm,
about your development and growing your skills and the kinds of things that people come to me with. Sometimes what they think they need help with isn't actually,
mm,
what transpires to be what they do need help with. So kinds of things like imposter syndrome,
mm,
lack of confidence. There's a lot around taking work home, how to switch off from work, how to have boundaries, work-life balance. But coaching can be whatever the person wants to be coached on. It
mm,
it doesn't have to be work related. It's whatever the person wishes to set a goal around
mm,
and then be coached on and help them to achieve that goal. So I choose to work with nurses because I recognize they don't have access to that.
mm, mm,
They have to pay for to be coached by me. It would be great if organizations would,
mm,
start to look at, okay. And I think this is where the NHS are kind of moving more in that space in the post-COVID world. They seem to
mm,
be looking at more supportive ways. So clinical coaching is something that I've heard being talked about. And I know
mm,
there is access to coaching through the NHS Leadership Academy. Australia doesn't seem to be really thinking proactively.
mm.
Um, and interestingly, I'm just in the process of writing an article for LinkedIn, and it's all about, the state of nursing at the moment. And
Mm,
again, I think not enough attention is being paid to. It's not all about pay. Yes, pay is important, but gone are the days where a cupcake on Nurses Day
mm.
as a thank you,
Yeah,
was acceptable. It's
yeah.
not anymore. We have to move beyond that. We absolutely have to give nurses tools in the toolbox. So, how to have a
Mm,
difficult conversation, how to manage conflict, how to set boundaries, how do you challenge in a way that people are going to listen? Those are the kinds of
mm,
things that nurses need coaching and
yeah.
help with if we're going to make any dent in the numbers of nurses who are leaving the profession. I don't want to see that. I think it's hugely, detrimental to health to
Mm,
see so many
mm,
people leave. Why are we not jumping up and down about that?
yeah.
It's like there's a tsunami of people who are just post COVID have had enough. I get that. I totally get
Mm,
that. My
mm,
question to healthcare organisations is, what are we doing about it?
yeah.
Because those healthcare organisations that address it will be the employers that people want to work
Mm,
for in the future.
mm,
And the ones
mm,
that don't are not. And it's going to
yeah,
be competitive.
totally. Yeah.
So, yeah,
I think
sorry,
you
bit
raised
of
no,
soapboxy.
no, I love all of that. And you raised so many valid points there in the sense that, we're throwing money at this problem now. Like, yeah, I'm seeing lots of incentives and I'm seeing a lot of talk online around, when we get ratios, it's going to be better. And when we get more
Yeah.
money, it's going to be better.
No.
And I think what we're doing, or what we've been conditioned to do as humans, is think that external things are going to fix the internal
Yeah.
problems.
No.
And you and I have both been on that path and journey.
Yeah.
So if you're listening and you think that these things are going to fix it, they're going to help for sure, but they're not going to change
No.
the world. And it's all about the inner work, right? And it's about
Yeah.
us gifting ourselves that experience to become the highest version of ourselves, because we can all manage the nursing industry. We
Yeah.
can manage the work. We are
Yeah.
amazing, resilient human beings. What we can't do is do it without the tools.
No. No.
It's just that simple, right? Isn't it? We can't do it without the tools and without the support. And this is where we're going to be in a situation where people are like you say, people are going to have, very limited options for employers of choice.
Yeah.
And those employers that do have it are going to be inundated. But this
Yeah.
is why it's so important, right? That people really do ask those questions that you were talking about
Yeah.
earlier in the process. Find out what they do to support you.
Yeah.
What does your staff support program look like? And like
Yeah.
you say, they'll probably roll their eyes and they don't know because they don't have one.
But it's interesting because I've started to see, and admittedly more in the private sector, some very clever advertising on some of the buses around Perth around work-life balance. Come and work with
Mm,
us. This is what you get. And this is the point of difference. If
yeah.
you're a nurse and you are struggling and you've had a really rough time in the last 2 years with COVID, all things
Mm,
COVID, and you see that on your way home from work on the side of a bus, you're going to think, hey, this is for
yeah.
me. They're going to look after me.
Yeah.
That's the point of difference. And I guess the litmus test is, does that actually in reality happen? If it
Mm.
does, well, take my hat off to organizations that really do invest in that, because that is what's going to make the difference.
Yeah.
And
And how can we as clinicians offer that to ourselves?
yeah,
How can we
yeah,
how can you allocate a percentage of your income every year to gift back to yourself?
yes,
We're so good at doing that ALS course 5 times in a row when we
yeah,
don't really need to top it up, right?
no,
How can we use that money and invest in our most precious asset, which is our brain? Right.
yes,
And that's the thing that's going to stop you from getting where you want to go is your brain.
yeah,
It's the
yeah,
thoughts that you have about whether it's
it is.
possible for you or not. And that's why I love coaching and the work that you do, because coaching for me is all about possibility.
Yeah,
It's about just playing with the possibility
yeah,
that you could totally transform your life. How exciting is
absolutely.
that? Yeah. So good. I love it. Well, I'm conscious of your time and so grateful. There's so much that we could talk about, but I wanted to finish up with a couple of rapid fire questions for you
Okay.
to learn a bit more about you. But so excited that we collaborated, and this is not
I
going to be the
know.
last time that you're on this podcast for sure. I hope you want to come back. So,
Yeah, definitely.
um, if you could change one thing about, I think I know the answer to this, but if you could change one thing about nurse leadership in particular, what would it be?
Coaching.
Coaching. I love it. Yay. We're not advertising at all.
No, no, no. No,
we,
genuinely,
yeah,
genuinely, I
no,
do mean that. It
I think
makes
this is the
such a
thing.
difference.
Yeah, like we believe it so deeply. And I think what's interesting in the coaching space is that we all have such strong belief in it that
Yeah,
we know that it's going to take decades probably, but we're here for it.
yeah,
Like it's
yeah,
fine. We're
yeah.
here. We'll be here.
We're not going
We're
anywhere.
not going anywhere and we'll be sitting here saying, told you so. No, we won't, because we'll be very positive about it. What advice would you give new graduate nurse Eva when she first started out? Reflecting back, what advice would you give her?
Never stop asking questions. There's always something you can learn. Never turn an opportunity down, and don't change yourself the higher up the ladder you get. Always be you.
I just got goosebumps. I love that so much. I'm sure little Eva would have loved that. New graduate Eva. It's so good. Um, Final question. Upon reflection this year, what are you celebrating? What are you most proud of in your life and career?
This year, I think we were talking earlier before we went live. There's been challenges obviously around COVID because I think that's impacted on people's ability to have the headspace for coaching.
Mm,
So, I'm proud of the work that I do, Liam. I advocate, the the benefit of working for myself is I can probably be a bit more vocal than if I was employed.
Mm.
I'd have to toe the line a bit more. So I have certain freedoms in that regard to kind of say things which I am passionate about. Um, I think I'm proud of my family, my work-life balance. That's probably been the biggest difference for me, leaving a high-powered role. You realize how much flexibility you have. I miss the teams. I miss working with a
Mm.
team and the camaraderie but there's always ways to go back and do the odd shift. So I
Mm.
still get that
Yeah.
fixed.
I love that. And for those listening that think or tell themselves the story that, if I leave a clinical job, I can't go back, Eva
Oh
is
no.
living proof. You
Yes,
use those skills at every level of your career. It
absolutely.
is not true and factual. I love that. So, where can people find out more about you? Where can they come follow you, get in touch with you for coaching?
Yep. So I have a website, which is evastorey.com. So you can find me there, find all about me. There's a contact form there. I have podcast Real Nurse Stories if you want to have a listen to those. Yeah, so I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I have a nurses group, the Resilient, I can't remember what it's called now, Resilient Nurse, I think it's called. So yeah, just put me into Google and you'll find me.
Fabulous, Dr. Google or Nurse Google.
Nurse
We
Google.
will make sure that all of the details are in the show notes. But Eva, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being a voice for nursing,
Oh,
and thank you for everything that you do.
thank you, Liam. It's been a pleasure. Look
We
forward to
are,
next time.
yeah, we are just getting started, people. Alrighty, I'll see you soon.
All right, see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you so much for watching the High Performance Nursing podcast. Make sure you subscribe and hit that bell for all future video notifications. If you want to dive deeper into this work, please come and join us in the High Performance Nursing membership. All the links are in the comments below. We would love to see you there and help you thrive within your nursing life, career, and mindset. Let's do this.